Hello again, everybody, and welcome to CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff as the Miami Hurricanes get ready to travel up to Tallahassee for their annual date with what's supposed to be their chief rival. The game's changed a little bit in recent years, but the Florida State Seminoles in a 3:30 contest that'll be nationally televised by ESPN. As always, at this time of year, I'm joined by Gene Williams of WarChant.com, and we're going to talk a little bit about Florida State today and get a feel for what's going on up there in Seminole camp. And Gene, another fun season up there for you guys in Tallahassee. I'm sure it's been relatively interesting, but Florida State comes into this game with a disappointing 3-6 record. Seems like this season has already lasted for 10 months for the Seminoles when you look at what the heck that team has been through. I mean, they opened the season against Notre Dame, actually played a really good game that day. And then the next week they go and they lose to Jacksonville State. Not quite sure.
That's still when you say that, Gary, I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around that one.
It's unbelievable. I mean, how do you almost beat Notre Dame, which is still a highly ranked team, and then lose to Jacksonville State at home? It's just unfathomable. But really, Gene, it's the way the whole FSU season has gone. I mean, they peel off a couple victories over Syracuse. They upset a very good North Carolina team on the road, no less, 35-25. Obviously, they blow out UMass. But then another losing streak. They lost to Clemson. They lose to NC State. So they're 3-6 coming into this game with Miami. Give us your overall summation of the state of the Seminoles.
Well, I'd say they've gone from being awful to somewhat competent. I mean, that's the easiest way to – I mean, they're not being – the only game they lost by multiple scores was Wake Forest, and they had 6 turnovers in that game. So that's the only reason why that would have been close as well. It's been a really, like you mentioned, Gary, a strange season. The Jacksonville State game was arguably the worst coach game I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it was literally like they went out there saying this was going to be a scrimmage. They were doing crazy stuff, all kind of weird things. They were trying to put a lot of stuff on film, I think, for the next opponent. And then some wacky stuff happened at the end of the game, and it just what happened? They, last play of the game, they don't go into a prevent when they throw basically a Hail Mary, and they beat them in a game. But I will say shortly after that, I think they found their identity when they brought Jordan Travis back. See, initially that Notre Dame game, that was almost all Jordan Travis. And McKenzie comes in late in that game. Mackenzie Milton, the transfer from UCF, has a couple good plays. They said, well, let's start this guy. That was a bad move. It's not the identity of the team. They can't pass protect. They have bad wide receivers. So you're putting a guy back there who's on one leg with a bad offensive line, and they learned that after a couple games. That's not the way to go. So when they got in that 3-game winning streak, they established their identity. Jordan Travis had opened up the running game. That's the kind of team they are. They're going to run a lot with the quarterback, a lot of the zone reads. They did that really well for a while, and they actually had a lead at Clemson late in the game. Now, that if they would have gotten a couple first downs when they had the ball with a couple minutes left, they would have won that game. So there's no disrespect in losing to a really good defensive team up there. So they were on that 3-game winning streak. They almost beat Clemson. And, of course, not COVID, but flu ravages the team last week. So almost 25 players were down with the flu. So Jordan Travis didn't play. The 2 best offensive linemen weren't out there. I'm convinced, I don't know if I'm being biased, I think they beat NC State if they're at full strength in that game. They had to put Mackenzie Milton out there again. And again, you saw this offense can't do anything without Jordan Travis leading this offense. Well, the good news for Florida State is he was back out at practice finally on Tuesday, Jordan Travis. So he's been out practicing this week. They seem to be, for the most part, over the flu. So we'll see what the identity, the team's been all over the map this season of how they've been, but it seems like they have their identity if they're relatively healthy. At the very least, again, they've been competitive in every game, even some of those ones they've lost.
You mentioned that you think that they might have beaten NC State if they were at full speed. And NC State, to me, is one of the best teams in the ACC this year. And, I've been telling our fans down here in Miami that this is not a game to sleep on. And I know FSU got blown out by the Hurricanes last year. I know that they're 3-6, but they did start to get progressively better in the middle of the season. And they're a better version than last year's team. Last year they were allowing 36 points a game, only scoring 25.8. Those numbers have improved this year. They're allowing an average of 27 points a game. So that's 9 points a game better defensively than a year ago. And they're scoring 28.1. What do you think has allowed them to progressively get better here in the middle of the season? If we throw out the NC State game where you said 27 guys were missing.
Yeah, I mean, it's primarily just Jordan. I mean, first of all, Jordan Travis played a little bit last year. He was kind of in and out in the lineup with injuries, but he really didn't have much practice time. But they started to learn, hey, this guy can run around and make plays. And again, like I said, when they got in that 3-game winning streak, they just decided to go, well, Mackenzie Milton just isn't working. He's not mobile enough. He's a bad fit for this offense. So they got a guy in there suddenly who, a defense, you got to respect him because he does that zone read. And if you don't contain him, he gets outside, and we've seen it. He can bust off an 80-yard run at any time, and that opens up. They've got a really good running back duo with Ward and with Ja'Shawn Corbin. Those are two really good running backs. When you have all those guys going together, they're putting up 200 plus yards a game on the ground when they've got those guys all out there intact, and their offensive line. Early in the season too, their two best offensive linemen were out. They got them back the past few weeks ago, so they've been a lot better both in pass protection and running. So that's why I think, again, you kind of throw out that NC State game because Jordan was not out there. And again, I think they're legitimately about a 500 team, I think, when they're at full strength. So they've been competitive, like I said, every game. I think the line's only 2.5, 3. I expect them to be competitive in this game. I know Miami's got problems on defense. I think Florida State, as long as they're all healthy, I think we'll be able to move the ball. And I think they've gotten a little bit better on defense. Last season, if you watch this team, every single play, there's a breakdown in the secondary. Guys are running wild out there. And it happened a little bit in the season, but they started to use the same rotation in the secondary, so it's the same guys that sort of get used to playing together. There's still the breakdown or two. I can guarantee Miami's going to have one or two big plays down the field where a guy's going to be open, but it's less frequent. So teams are having to earn the way up and down the field where they weren't getting cheap scores in the past. So I think those two teams have kind of combined for this team to, again, like I said, they're somewhat competent, which is a lot better than they were last year. They were just awful.
Let's talk a little bit of offense first. And, to those of us outside of your program at Florida State, I think when Mackenzie Milton transferred to Florida State, there was a little bit of an assumption that he would be the quarterback this year. You're not typically getting a guy like that out of the transfer portal, bringing him into a program to sit on the bench or be a backup or, those kind of things. But it hasn't really played out that way. I mean, in the opener that I remember watching, they kind of split duty. And there were times where it seemed like they were better with Mackenzie Milton, but they have very quickly figured out that they're better with Jordan Travis at quarterback, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, that's without a doubt. And I think that's one of the things that just amazes me when you look at Florida State's roster on offense. It's embarrassing. The wide receiver core, I don't think any of the guys starting at wide receiver would start at maybe any Power 5 team. I mean, it's amazing. And Gary, this state, they grow on trees, the elite guys, the speed guys and guys who can get open. But Florida State has just they've had a combination of transfers, defections, injuries. So they're just really scraping the bottom barrel. These receivers can't get separation. I mean, you got a guy like McKenzie, he's a very accurate passer. He doesn't have a big arm, but he can get that ball out quick, and he's very accurate with his passes. The bottom line is guys aren't getting separation. And when you combine that with an offensive line that doesn't pass protect very well, man, it's just a bad fit for him. I think in certain situations, if McKenzie would have gone to a team with a better receiving core and a decent offensive line, he could have been good. But don't make a mistake, he's not the same guy that was at UCF a few years ago. He had that horrific leg injury, a guy they never thought would walk right again. And it's incredible that he's been able to get out there and start football games in an elite level in college. But, man, he just doesn't have the same mobility like he used to.
So Travis brings the run pass threat to the table, but he's improved from last year as a passer. This year he's hitting 62.9% of his throws. Last year he only hit 55%. He's got 11 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Last year in the entire season, he only had 6 touchdowns. So he's better than he was last year. But what does that mean, Gene? What does better mean for Jordan Travis? How good of a quarterback is he?
Yeah, but I think he's a little bit better passing, but I think the coaches have done a better job figuring out how best to use him. And those plays, when you talk about those increases in percentages and everything else he's done, that's off the play action. They've got the identity. This is a run first team. They're going to run, 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 run. And what happens is, and if you run and you run successfully, that sets up the RPOs. It sets up the play action game. And the coaching staff has done a nice job when they're able to establish that run. Doesn't matter if you don't have great wide receivers, great pass protection. If that defense is focused in on the run and you catch him at the right time, that opens up some plays. I think sometimes last year they try to do is they just put him back in the pocket and had him try to throw the ball around. That's not his game. If a team gets way ahead and he's got to throw the football, that's not going to be where Florida State's going to excel. So I think they've done a better job. I think he had in the last, like in the Clemson game, I think he threw in the teens. I mean, he just didn't throw the ball that often. So I think, again, it's the play action, it's the RPO why he's been able to be a much better player this year.
The workhorse is Jay Sean Corbin, averaging 6.9 yards a carry. That tells me, Gene, that the offensive line has gotten better up there than it's been the last couple of years. That was a big problem for Florida State. I know last season and really the year before, they must have improved up front if they have a starting running back averaging 6.9 yards a carry with 747 yards and 6 touchdowns. He also is a threat out of the backfield. He's caught a team-high 19 passes. They've only gone for 90 yards, but they will throw it to him out of the backfield. So Miami's going to have to cover him both as a running threat and a passing threat. But am I right? Has the offensive line gotten better that's allowing them to be this run-first offense?
Yeah, it's definitely improved. I'd say it's still not good. It's close to average, but I mean, a couple key things happened there. For one, I mean, you got Dylan Gibbons, who's a transfer from Notre Dame, who's a guard, and Notre Dame's going to have good offensive linemen. You can tell this guy's the best offensive lineman. He grades the highest consistently on PFF. He's really good. Maurice Smith is a really very talented guy. He was a true freshman last year, a little banged up. He was banged up early in the season. He's come back. He's healthy. So I think those two guys kind of stir the shake there in the middle of the field. And again, like I said, I think the combination of a little bit better offensive line and having that threat of Jordan breaking it out of there. And you see these teams that have these mobile quarterbacks, it helps the whole running game. It opens up lanes for these runners. And you mentioned Jay Sean Corbin. Man, this was a Texas A&M transfer last year, but he was coming off a pretty bad injury, so it really wasn't 100%. He's 100% this year, and I think he's a guy that can play on Sundays because, like you said, he can catch the ball in the backfield really well. He pass protects well when he needs to, and he runs hard between the tackles. So, I mean, this is a player that can do it all. So you're going to see him. And then Trayshawn Ward is the other running back who gets a lot. And he's a great story. He's a former walk-on. But maybe you see the guy play. He has a burst. And he's a little bit more electric, a little bit quicker in the open field when he gets out there. So that's going to be the majority, the three-headed monster with Jordan and those two guys for the running game.
You mentioned the weak spot of wide receiver, which is kind of unfathomable in the state of Florida, that these teams would not have wide receivers. I mean, Miami's got a bunch of issues. Wide receiver is not really one of them right now. So it's kind of surprising to see Florida State in that situation. Mark Pope's in the transfer portal. They can they can maybe take a shot there for next year. But they also, Miami can't ignore the tight end. They will throw to Cameron McDonald. He has 18 catches this year. But in just looking at how Miami's played defense in recent weeks, Gene, I'm guessing Manny Diaz is stacking the box. He's going to stack the box. You're going to see 8 guys up there. He's going to try to take away that Florida State running game. He's not going to let them pound it down the field on him. And they're going to say, Jordan Travis, we're not letting you run. We're not giving you the running game. You got to beat us through the air. If it plays out that way, what happens?
Well, that's absolutely the way he should call the game. You got to make Florida State beat you going against what they don't like to do. And I will say North Carolina, who has not a great defense, they kind of did the same game plan. But the problem is it worked on the first couple of series, and then Jordan Travis did hit. He still has enough of an arm to get the ball down there. And he did hit a deep play for a touchdown, and then North Carolina didn't know what to. At that point, it kind of opened things up, and then Florida State could run or pass, and they kind of moved the ball at will for the whole game. So that's the thing. It means Florida State's going to then have to. I mean, if Miami stacks the box, they're going to have to take a couple shots down the field, and that may dictate if they can't hit any of those, it could be a long afternoon for Florida State. But if they do, then it's going to open up the running game. But I do think, they're going to try to run first because we've seen Miami sometimes struggles against the run, and struggles tackling like Florida State does at times. So, I mean, I think that's going to be the game plan. But they will take their shots when they know a team is stacking the box.
Yeah, and I think Miami will. And obviously, Miami is going to want to get Florida State in third down. Keep an eye on this stat, folks. FSU was just 2 of 16 on third down against NC State last week. And I'm sure that's a big point of emphasis in their practices this week. But it's also something to keep an eye on in the game as well.
But Gary, if I can point something out there, if you go the last 4 or 5 games before that, they were actually doing very well situationally in third down. That was again the McKenzie Milton factor because he could not run. When they got in third down and they had to pass with him not being able to
They
run
teed off on
and
him.
no running game, they stocked the box and Florida State couldn't get separation. You're right, it was a horror show on third down for Florida State, but I do not think they were actually really good on third downs in the games before that. So I'm not sure that's going to be the case, but they do. When you get them third and long enough, when he's got to throw, yeah, the other team has a huge advantage because you can run sometimes for 6, 7 yards, the quarterback, when you got to go 11, 12, 13 yards. That's kind of hard to do against a defense when they expect the quarterback to run. Now, NC State also, it's interesting, or Clemson actually did what Venables did. He put 2 spies. I've never seen that before on Jordan Travis because he's like, if you're going to beat us, it's not going to be with that guy running the football. Now, they do have an elite defense, so they can get away with that. They could go man all over the field, and that made it very difficult for Florida State. But, I mean, that's one thing I'm sure Manny is looking at that film too and going, I may have to put 1 or 2 spies on him to not let him beat us.
All right. Defensively, Florida State's been better this year. They picked up a couple key guys in the transfer portal. I remember talking to you about Jermaine Johnson, the defensive end from Georgia, before the season, and how there was a great hope in Tallahassee that he could maybe help take the Florida State defense up a notch this year. And despite the 3-6 record, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that has happened. And Miami comes into this game with a scorching hot quarterback. Tyler Van Dyke has taken over the reins from De'Ara King and has just been getting better each week, more confident. And I'm sure Florida State is looking at him as a problem. He's got a good arm. He's getting the ball down the field. And there's only one thing they can be thinking in the defensive meeting rooms this week, and that is we got to pressure the living daylights out of this kid and speed up the game for him. And Florida State, they got 25 sacks in their 9 games so far. I mean, not outrageous, but certainly a lot better than they were a year ago. And the yardage aspect of things hasn't been too terrible, and really a much better defense than a 3-6 record probably suggests.
Well, yeah, you're right. It starts up front, and it is a team strength. This is a good defensive line. I mean, you can almost look across the board at Florida State and go, they're average, below average. Everybody, look at that defensive front. It's actually really good. You mentioned Jermaine Johnson, and he's been as good as advertised. I mean, I think he's played himself at a potential first-round pick next year. Teams have been trying to double him up. And what's happened, that's helped Keir Thomas, who's another transfer from South Carolina. On the other side, he had 2 sacks against Leary at NC State last week, and he's really coming on too. So you got 2 defensive ends that are really going to create some problems, and I do think you're absolutely right. That's where the game may be won or lost. Florida State, they get pressure. They got a fighting chance to really maybe make this a game. If you can't get pressure, like you said, the way Van Dyke's been throwing that ball around, and Florida State's secondary has improved, but it's still a little suspect. It's amazing if you go back and look at that NC State game, they really contained Leary the whole game, but there were about 2 or 3 plays where they just had a horrible breakdown or just horrible tackling in the open field, and those broke big plays. But for the most part, they pressured Leary all afternoon. And again, I think they would have won that game had they had a better – almost every play on offense was 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. So they kept losing field position. They kept giving NC State the ball. You can't do that to a quality team after a while. But, defensively, that front 4 – and a couple of those linebackers really did a nice job. And you're right. That may be the key. Maybe it'll tell them the first couple series. If they can't get pressure, you kind of know where this game's going to go. If they can, you never know how it's going to go then.
Yeah, I agree. And, Miami feels that their offensive line has gotten better the last few weeks. There's been a lot of talk in that regard. But they haven't played a great defensive line either in that stretch. And, NC State was decent. But Pittsburgh's defensive line was undersized, and it was a good matchup for Miami. They were able to control them physically, and so it worked out well. Georgia Tech's defensive line was nothing to write home about for sure. So while Miami's performed better up front, theoretically, they haven't been challenged the way they're going to be challenged Saturday at Doak Campbell Stadium. And we talked about Jermaine Johnson, and he's got 54 tackles this year, 11 tackles for a loss, 8 sacks, 7 quarterback hurries. And Keir Thomas on the other side, he's got 9 tackles for a loss with 4.5 sacks. So those 2 guys are going to challenge Zion Nelson and Jared Williams at tackle. There's no doubt
And they're
about it.
big. You look at those guys. You talk about undersized. They're big. They look like NFL defensive ends. They are big dudes who are quick, physical. So
Yes.
they will challenge you physically up there. So you're right. And it'll be interesting to see if they do get pressure. If Miami's got to do, will they keep a tight end in or have a back in there to help with pass protection? Because to leave those guys one on one is good. Unless you're an elite tackle, I don't think you can go against those guys one on one, especially with an immobile quarterback.
Yeah, and Jalen Knight, the running back, is not a proven commodity, helping in blitz pickups and pass blocking. That's for starters. The question I had for you is, how much does Florida State blitz?
Not a ton. They really haven't done a ton of that. I think they've been so afraid because they've had so many breakdowns in the secondary that they're kind of almost afraid to do that. But they have done it a little bit more the past few weeks, I've noticed. And I think they've gotten more confidence. Like I said, it's crazy the amount last year and early this year, the amount of rotation they had in the secondary. It seemed like there was a different starting five every freaking week. And then all of a sudden, guys are healthy and they were out there playing together. So I think they've got kind of a stable unit out there. So they've got more confidence in that group to at least not have the big breakdown. So they are bringing a little bit more. Usually, Amari Gainer is probably the fastest guy who can come off the edge. Sometimes they bring him on a blitz. He's one of the linebackers. There's nobody else in there really. The linebacker unit can really scare you with a blitz, but he's a guy that if it's going to be, it'll be Amari Gainer.
So we might see a little more of that this week. I mean, I got
they
to
might have to.
Yeah, I think they're thinking, we can't let Charleston Rambo and Mike Harley and Restrepo and these guys run loose in the secondary all day. They got to shorten the time back there and get Van Dyke scrambling a little bit so he's not as effective. And so I'm expecting to see a little bit more blitzing maybe than they've shown at times because, Gene, this is a secondary that even though it's better than last year, I mean, they've been had at times.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they had some guys missing last week, but Leary had 314 yards. Opposing quarterbacks this year are hitting almost 60% of their passes against Florida State, 18 touchdowns, just 8 interceptions. So it's a secondary that can be had a little bit. And it's kind of amazing because, you think about Florida football and Florida State, to see them, so challenged at wide receiver and defensive back, which are the two positions you would think no state of Florida team is challenged at, is really, really bizarre. But I think that's just reality right now. And I guess that that's a good segue into the state of Florida in general. Florida's struggling, Florida State's struggling, Miami's been struggling until they peeled off 3 straight victories here coming into this game Saturday. We'll see how this one goes. But there really isn't any sign of anybody just grabbing the state of Florida and making it their own right now. I mean, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's kind of there for the taking. Miami just come out a little bit, and this may be an opportunity for them. This could be, we've talked about it here. The program has definitely improved. They've got actually a pretty good recruiting class coming in, including Travis Hunter, the #1 player in the country. So, I mean, for Florida State's looking at this, maybe if they can knock off a Florida or a Miami, or, heck, maybe even both, because, I mean, like I said, anything's possible at this stage.
Anything's possible.
That could give them the momentum going to the offseason with a good recruiting class. You get a couple key transfers in the portal. It's up for grabs at this point, I think, for one of the teams to take it by the horns. And even though Florida State's been the most down of the two programs, I mean, at this point, anything goes. So, yeah, I mean, this is why this last 3 games for Florida State is so important for Mike Norvell. I mean, we see the difference on the field, and you watch them play. They're so much better than they were a year ago. But like I said, they were 3-6 last year. They're 3-6 right now. So at the end of the day, the fans care about that record.
No doubt.
So and one of those
State didn't help any.
Yeah. So you better knock off, at least one of your last 2 rivals because they're both possible wins. If you lose those 2, even if you beat BC, I mean, that's okay, but you finish with 4 wins, but you would have again gone 0 for all your rivals. So I think it's important for them to one of those games. And like we all know, that's huge in recruiting too, because then you can, say, I mean, I'm sure Miami's going to do the pitch and Florida's going to be, yeah, but you're always going to lose to Florida and Miami. You don't want to do that every year. So it's really important for Mike Norvell to get that signature win in state. Sure, he's gotten it against North Carolina a couple of years in a row. But at the end of the day, the kid in South Florida doesn't care you beat the Tar Heels.
No.
But you beat the Canes, you beat the Gators. Yeah, that means something.
Yeah. I think about this every time I watch Texas A&M and I see Jimbo Fisher over there on that sideline. And I actually passed through College Station this summer and went out to Texas A&M and was out there for a little bit at the Jimbo Fisher football camp. That was kind of interesting. And he had 5 straight double-digit win total seasons, and Florida State's on top of the world, and it just suddenly went away. Like at the snap of a finger, it just went away. And then he leaves, and they go 5-7 and 6-7 under Taggart. Norvell comes in, goes 3-6 last season. He's off to a 3-6 start this season. Is there a feeling in Tallahassee that Mike Norvell can get this done and turn this program around, or is he just a placeholder for another year or so, maybe before they have to make their next change?
Well, that's why I said I think these next couple games may make or break his tenure. I think there's a general feeling like we see it. I mean, you can see this team they're getting better players in the portal. They're doing better recruiting. They're, at least, like I said, they're competent on the field. You watch some of the stuff was going on in practice with Willie Taggart before. You're just like, how is this guy a Division I coach? You don't know what he's doing. At least you see some competency and some guys going in the right direction, and they have improved. Record-wise, I know it was a Parcells. You are your record, so it's the same record, but you can see on the field they are a better team. But again, you got to prove it to the fans. So I don't think you can just say, oh, he's a placeholder. No, I think he's got things going in the right direction. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many close games you have. Like every game, like I said, they've had 3 or 4 games that have gone down the last play. It doesn't matter. You do that every week if you don't win those games. So that's why he's got to start winning some games. I think he's got to win, like I said, one of these 2. You hold on to that good recruiting class. You go and you build on that. Next year, you get to maybe a somewhat decent bowl game, and I think could really grow for there. But man, the time is starting to tick on him. He's got to start winning some games.
Does he seem to enjoy being at Florida State? Is he engaged?
Oh yeah, I mean he's a joy to work with. He's very open to the media. We actually are able to go out to practices and watch them. He makes all the players, all the assistants available, and he's got a really good attitude. Remember, I think it's a little different when you come from Memphis. You're like, oh, this is so neat. All the fans and look at everybody coming out and all this media attention. It's great. But yeah, like I said, if he loses these next 3 games and people start to turn on him a little bit more, he may not like it as much. I think everybody kind of gave him a break, and rightfully so. Last year was so weird. Everything that happened with Willie Taggart before and the program just falling apart. And then you had the COVID year where you couldn't recruit, you couldn't practice. So everybody kind of gave him a pass. But after this season, that pass is going to go away. So he needs to do something pretty quickly.
It's going to be interesting, Gene. I'm expecting a tight game Saturday. Yep. I really am. I think it's going to be the Miami's latest. They've had 5 games in the ACC this year. All 5 have been like coin flips. Like they could have gone either way. They lost 2, then they've won 3. After this, they got a Virginia Tech team that looks to me like they've packed it in.
Yeah, they've given up.
They looks like they've given up. Justin Fuente pretty much knows he's going to be fired. And then they play Duke. So if Miami beats Florida State on Saturday, you're looking at a 6-game winning streak potentially to end the season. And suddenly it was assumed that Manny Diaz was getting fired this year. And now it's going to be it's going to be a big time question as to what's going to happen at Miami.
Well, you can't fire a game winning 6 in a row. There's no way.
Well, that's what that's a lot of fans fear, believe it or not. Because it's like Miami at some point, and I feel strongly about this. It has nothing to do with Manny Diaz. Manny's going to be fine no matter what. He's set for life. The whole thing. He hit the lottery. Miami's got to decide, and I guess Florida State also is in the same boat. What do they want to be? If you want to get back to the days when you're in the top 10 every year, Florida State was certainly under Bobby Bowden for so long. You have to operate at a whole different level than what's going on right now at both schools. I mean, neither school is operating at even close to the level that they need to be at that point in college football and that relevant. And just like Florida State's got to figure out, can Mike Norvell take us there? Miami's asking the same question: can Manny Diaz take us to that level? Can he run a program at that level? And you could go on like this forever. I mean, I'm assuming Florida State will get better than a 3-win season. It's here relatively soon, but 6, 7, 8 wins in the ACC is not all that difficult. I mean, we're watching teams like Wake Forest and Virginia and North Carolina State. All these teams, even Boston College, and Like they're all the same, and they're all winning 7-8 games and whatever. Everybody does that in the ACC. You could go on like this forever. So both of these programs, to me, are at a real crossroad, and Florida State's going to have to figure out here with Norvell relatively quickly whether he can do it. They found out, unfortunately, real quickly that Willie Taggart couldn't. So all these forces, Gene, collide at Doak Campbell Stadium on Saturday. What kind of crowd are they expecting out there?
Man, I tell you, it was sad. I mean, I think it was bad. The attendance that I haven't seen, I don't know, ever for a major game. I mean, NC State was ranked one of the top teams in the ACC. I think the announced attendance was a little over 50. It was probably more like 40 or less, half full. You just don't see that Doak Campbell now because the U is coming in. I'm guessing it'll be pretty close to fill. And I think that was one of the reasons a lot of people didn't show up last week was because, well, if we're going to come, most of the fans drive from Jacksonville, Atlanta, Tampa,
Right.
Orlando, wherever. They're like, we're not going to go there 2 weeks in a row to see a bad team. But we'll see them play Miami. So I think that place Doak will be rocking pretty good on Saturday.
Yeah, and they're not exactly kind with the hotel rates in Tallahassee either.
That from experience. Yes,
pretty comical.
They gouge you. Because there's only a dozen. It's not like South Florida where there's 1,000 hotels. There's a dozen of them in Tallahassee, so they get you.
Yeah. So, all right, Gene, we'll see you up there this weekend. Always enjoy that, and we'll see what happens with these two teams. And maybe one day, the Miami-Florida State game will get back to meaning what it once did. But so for Gene Williams of WarChant.com, I'm Gary Ferman. Thank you for joining us on CaneSports Countdown to Kickoff. We'll see you next time, everybody.